here gets out safely.
Dan, we understand we now have this 10-hour break. Does that now imply that they're using the exact same dive team for the next stage?
Yes, we understand it's a relatively small team of really experienced cave divers who've come here from around the world. There are 18 of them, 13 international dive experts working with 5 of the elite Thai Navy divers, and they have been responsible for training the boys, for assessing whether they were actually ready, whether they had the ability and the strength to make it out alive, and they were the ones who decided which boys would go first. They decided to take the weakest first, the ones who they thought needed to get out first. Now they've done that today, escorting those boys on that journey that took about 9 hours probably for them to get out of the cave entirely from the cavern where they were stranded. But everyone's aware of how tricky and complicated this is, how it needs care and attention, so that dive team is off now, having some rest, having some sleep, regaining their energy, ready to come back here tomorrow, focused and ready to apply that expertise to make sure that the remaining boys and their coach can be escorted out as quickly as possible, but also as safely as possible, because there is still a lot of danger, a lot of uncertainty in this rescue attempt.
Dan, before we let you get out of the rain, whilst the team are having this break, does that mean that pumping operations will resume and continue?
Yeah, they've been pumping water almost continuously since this whole saga started more than 2 weeks ago now, just to keep the water level in the cave stable. They've had to pump millions of litres of water a day, and that continues. And I think some of the equipment that you've just seen going in may have been more generators and more pumps, because they have to keep turning over that equipment, keep making sure that there is power to keep it running. And there is a torrent of water that's been running down from that cave where they've been pumping out for the last 2 weeks. They've even had to start digging a reservoir here at the bottom of the hill to take all that water so that it doesn't cause problems elsewhere. But it never seemed to be a realistic expectation that they could drain enough water out of the cave so that the boys would be able to walk out. You might have heard early on there was talk of just waiting, sitting this out, but that may have taken months for the water level to go down, and in the meantime there was always the risk of more rain actually forcing the water level up. There was also the option of drilling down to the boys from above, and they did drill some exploratory holes trying to find the shortest distance to reach the cavern, but they worked out that it was at least 600 metres, and the nature of the mountainous environment around here, it's really tough, steep terrain with thick vegetation, so the option of drilling was explored but looked like it would have taken a long time. So that's why the scuba diving option, the boys actually swimming out the way that they came in, the way they walked in 2 weeks ago, that's what was favoured, that's what has been put into action today, and them having proven that that can work, that's what they'll carry on doing tomorrow, and everyone hoping and determined that the rest of the group will succeed so that everyone can celebrate when 13 people are safely out of this cave.
OK, Dan Johnson at Tham Luang Cave Complex, thank you. Well, our correspondent Nick Beek is at the hospital where the boys were taken. Nick, what can you update us with?
Well, they were certainly waiting for good news here, and they were waiting for their patients to arrive. And about 2.5 hours ago, sure enough, the medical teams at this hospital, it's the main hospital in the Chiang Rai region, received the first of their patients. We saw 2 ambulances come up to this entrance. They moved aside the railings. They sped through to the entrance. We also later heard 2 ambulances overhead, and we believe that 2 other boys were brought into the hospital through another entrance. They've been waiting for them. They've had medical teams assessing their health for the past week or so. Remember, there was a doctor down in the cave with them after they were found by the amateur British divers, and they've been assessing their condition day by day. And we heard this morning that the decision had been made to go for this rescue attempt. They believed the boys were strong enough mentally, but also, crucially, physically. In terms of how they're doing now, that is hard to assess. Certainly nothing official from the doctors and nurses here, but the indications we're getting this evening are that they're doing well, considering what has happened to them. A huge ordeal. And when you think about the path that they had to take to get out of that cave, extremely narrow in places, visibility extremely difficult as well. Impossible to see things in front of you. The fact that 4 boys are out this evening has given people a lot of hope here in Thailand.
Nick, understandably, the hospital and the authorities have been very keen to look after the privacy of the families and the boys as well. There was a lot of screening and security present outside that hospital. Has it now died down?
Certainly there are fewer members of the media here now, and obviously that's a result of the press conference about an hour ago where they said there'll be no more operations, there'll be a lull in this rescue effort, because of course, as Dan was saying there, these are specialist people. It's quite a small core of people who have the skills to get to the place where the boys have been trapped, so they need to rest overnight. We don't know what exactly is going on inside the hospital now. Certainly the parents that you mentioned, they've been at the rescue site for the past 2 weeks, and they've been kept up to date with all the information. And if they are here tonight, clearly they would have been told before anyone else what is happening. It was interesting, we heard from one of the, one source earlier on, that they've managed to have part of the hospital sealed off so that the boys could be brought in, treated, and they'd undergo routine examinations, so blood test, urine test. They'd look to see if they picked up any sort of infection due to being in that water, which is extremely dirty and murky too. So we may get more information about their condition overnight or possibly in the morning, but this is an ongoing operation. It's going to take hours, and remember, it takes the most experienced divers some 11 hours to get to the point where the boys were and back again, so this is a marathon operation.
Nick Meek, thank you very much for that update. Thank you. Nick there was just outside of the local hospital where the boys have been taken to. Well, let's speak now to Amy Sawita Lefebvre. She is Reuters Bangkok Deputy Bureau Chief. And Amy, thank you for joining us here. One of the biggest stories, possibly, that Thailand has had to deal with.
Yes, it's certainly one of the biggest story in years for Thailand, and it's a good news story so far. It's definitely a story that's brought this country together, a country that's been divided politically for many, many years. A big story, but also a good one.
Have you, whilst you've been there or in your memory, can you remember any story which has involved this level of rescue and this cooperation internationally? And also there's been a lot of military involvement in this operation.
I don't think we've seen anything on this scale in recent Thai history, really. It's been a huge operation, 1,000+ Thai volunteers, that's just Thai volunteers, and teams flying in from all over the world, Britain, Australia, the US, Japan, to name just a few. And the level of coordination involved over the past 2 weeks has been something that has been truly amazing. We've heard international teams commend the Thais for their effort, and vice versa as well. And I don't think the country's seen anything like this before.
So what have local press been saying, and how have they been covering this story?
Well, the coverage here has been pretty much blanket coverage, non-stop. And when you go out into the streets, whether it's here in the capital, Bangkok, or elsewhere, pretty much everyone in Thailand is talking about these boys. And they have been talking about these boys ever since they were first trapped inside the cave. And of course, the big highlight was when the two British divers found the boys last week, last Monday, which was news that was met with a huge positive reaction, avalanche of goodwill on social media. So it's something that's really brought Thais together at this time.
I'd just like to know, how big is this sport of caving in the country?
Well, it is fairly popular in parts of the country, but it's definitely not a national level sport. It's not something that many people do. In fact, cycling is perhaps one of the biggest sports in Thailand. And of course, these boys who went in weren't expert cavers. They'd been in the cave before during dry season. This is the first time that they've gone in during rainy season. So they weren't experts by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, so rescue operations, we understand, resume 8 a.m. local time, where you are.
Yes, the chief of mission says that in about 10 hours, about 9 hours from now, the rescue operation will start again to get the remaining boys and also their assistant coach out of the Tham Luang cave. And we hope to see more progress tomorrow if the weather stays on their side.
Amy, just very quickly, it has to be said that The parents have come across as being quite calm in this. Is this just within the Thai character, or, you know, have they been more vocal and we just haven't heard this?
I think it's many factors. I mean, throughout this operation, we've seen the family kind of, you know, cordoned to one side. They've had their own tent, their own shelter. And throughout for the most part, they've had a Buddhist monk with them, or several Buddhist monks, leading prayers, meditation, chanting, Buddhism being in Thailand. So I think that's helped the parents quite a lot, helped to keep them calm, grounded, and they've been praying for good news, and finally the good news came that their boys were found. So I think that's a huge part of the calmness that we're seeing.
Okay, Amy Sowito-Lefevre, thank you so much speaking to us there. Reuters Bureau Chief. You're watching BBC News. Well, let's get a little bit more on this story. And from the world of cave diving itself, an instructor, Jeff Crossley, is joining us here on the programme. He was actually one of the divers who rescued Les Hewitt from a Yorkshire cave back in 1992, and he joins us now live from Cumbria. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. Watching events taking place in Thailand, what's this doing to you when you think about what happened in Cumbria?
Well, it's the same range of emotions, really, and I think your correspondents have put it very well. It's absolutely wonderful news, but it's not over yet, and you've got to be cautiously optimistic that when they go back in to resume the rescue operation, that things will continue to go well.
In terms of conditions, are they very similar around the world once you get inside a cave, or do they differ?
They do differ from country to country. I would say that from what I'm hearing from the Thai operation, they're actually quite similar to British conditions in that you get poor visibility and there are some small passages as well. The one perhaps good thing about the conditions over there is that it's warm. It certainly wouldn't be warm over here, but that's been a big plus in helping to get the boys out.
You rescued Les Hewitt back in 1992. The team here, or rather the team in Thailand, are having to rescue children. What would be your primary concern if you were part of that team?
Well, I think that it was a very big team effort to rescue Les and another caver, Roy Dean, at the time. And I think with children, again, I think your correspondent said it already, that it's prioritising who's the weakest, who needs to go out first, who's confident, probably. Who are the most confident boys? So it would be a case of putting them in the water, probably with the equipment attached to them, and giving them a trial run, not under the actual flooded part of the cave, but in the water where they are. And I think they would have worked all that out and then split them into groups to decide who was going to be the best to take out first, and then carry on from there. And it appears that's what the case is, where they've now suspended operations, because it is a very stressful experience searching for missing persons in a flooded cave, and then when you find them after the initial euphoria, you realise that they're not actually rescued until they're all out. So I would say that they've obviously got a plan, they're sticking to that plan, and they'll resume again tomorrow, and hopefully it will continue to be successful.
As a rescuer, Jeff, what goes through your mind? What pressures are you under?
Well, you've also got to think about your own safety, to be honest. But it is, as I've just said, it's a very stressful time when you are trying to get somebody out, and you're trying to be positive all the time. But you know there are serious dangers. So I think it's very much a case of focus on your own safety as well, but remain very, very positive for the casualty, to give them the confidence to get out.
So what sort of warning signs are you looking for then? I mean, we know that the weakest boys were taken out first, but doesn't that increase the risk? What health signs are you keeping your eyes out for?
Well, I mean, that's difficult to say for me. I mean, I'd be speculating there really regarding health signs. Certainly, from my experience on the rescues that I've been involved with, we would maintain, we would try and maintain visual contact, eye contact by almost swimming backwards with the ones that we brought out, 2 divers per casualty, and just looking at the eyes, keeping them focused, and then but watching for more signs of panic rather than medical issues. If the water's, I think it's quite shallow, so that again is a good thing. If the water's very deep, then it does become more of an issue physiologically.
Jeff, doesn't it add pressure if you're trying to keep eye contact with somebody you're trying to rescue and you're trying to move forward, but you're having to constantly look back to keep that eye contact? And we're hearing that these passages are just so narrow.
Yes, I mean there are sections that are narrow of most cave passages, and certainly that's one of the issues when you get to a narrow part. There's sometimes no alternative but to put the casualty through the narrow part without the guidance. I mean, you can be there, and your presence can be there, but maybe the physical contact or the eye contact might have to just be removed for a few seconds.
So how do you calm, as you describe, a casualty down? How do you calm them down if you're seeing signs of panic? What would you do?
It's a case of you would keep hold of them. You would ensure you've got that physical contact to make sure that they are, so you're reassuring them all the time, and you're also reassuring them through your eyes, to make sure that they understand that you're not panicking, that everything's okay, they're doing well, and hopefully they will respond to that in kind.
So we're dealing with children. Would you have to kind of pull them along in order to encourage them? You know, there may be that fear of water because we understand these children can't swim.
Yeah, I don't think the swimming issue is too much. It's too much of a problem actually, because they would once you get into a flooded passage, the best place to be is on the floor or thereabouts in this sort of situation. So they would be probably weighted suitably so that they're down on the floor and literally crawling or walking along the floor to get out. The children, I think, with these boys, I think we've seen from the temperament and the way they've conducted themselves, it's been absolutely amazing, really, that considering they've been trapped in the cave for so long. I think they might well see it as an adventure, and hopefully that's the way they will see it, and a bit of a challenge. I mean, they're clearly up for a challenge by the fact they've been wandering into these caves. So hopefully they'll see it like that, and they'll have that confidence that's required.
So how would you encourage a child to, what sort of communication methodology would you sort out before you enter the water? You'd say, you know, tug on the wire, or if something happens, if you're worried, if you're beginning to panic, how would you communicate with a child?
Well, you can't really communicate underwater apart from visual or signals. You can't talk to each other without specialised equipment, which you know, you wouldn't be equipping non-divers with that sort of equipment. So you have to get them as calm and collected as possible before you start the dive, and then once the dive's underway, it's maintaining that physical presence and that visual presence so that they know that there's someone with them at all times.
Since the operation, we'll call it a successful operation, of the 4 boys that we do know that have exited the cave, a lot of tributes have been paid to the diver who did lose his life earlier this week, Saman Gunan, who lost consciousness. How would you know if a child is losing consciousness?
Well, there would be no response, or they would stop moving if they were losing consciousness, and so you would have to speed things up to try and get them out. There are 2 speeds in cave diving, effectively, which are dead slow and stop. This will be a very slow, meticulous operation. But if someone is losing consciousness, then obviously you've got to do something about it. But it is difficult. If the visibility is very poor, it's one of the enemies of cave diving, is visibility. If it's very poor, then that might not be too apparent. So it's something you've got to keep an eye out for all the time. And I would say, actually, at this point, that with the Thai divers, it's a special mentions, and they've done a fantastic job. Considering it's not their remit, they're not trained cave divers. So it's wonderful what they've done and the way they've supported the operation, and been at the sharp end as well.
In terms of the gear that the rescue team and the children would be wearing. There is the risk there, isn't it, that that could get damaged, and also the airline that's attached to the diver. How do you ensure that that doesn't happen?
Well, as I say, I don't actually know what plan they've put into place over there regarding who wears the diving equipment or the air cylinder and where the air hose is going. Or I can only relate to our example, which was the casualty wore the air cylinder with the air hose, and this was part of being accompanied by 2 divers. So that's the first one was, as I said earlier, perhaps swimming backwards to a certain extent, keeping the visual and physical contact and feeding the guideline to the casualty. The diver behind was constantly making sure that the airline didn't catch on any rock projections, the line didn't get tangled on any of the equipment, which could seize the operation completely.
We now know that there is a 10-hour rest period. Why is that needed? What are they doing in that time?
Well, I think they've been working flat out. I think it's fairly obvious they've been working flat out, and I can't emphasise how stressful it will be for them, considering, especially bearing in mind that most of the divers there will not speak Thai, so they're having to constantly have language translations fed to them. And they just need rest and recuperation. But it's a good thing that the same team sticks together, because that's if the plan is working, then don't change it. And I'm sure that's what they've decided to do.
Jeff Crossley, thank you so much for the chat here on BBC News. Thank you.
You're welcome, thanks.
You're watching BBC News. If you've just joined us here, let's just remind you of our breaking story today. 4 of the 12 boys trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand have been brought out. A major operation involving international divers and elite members of the Thai Navy has been taking place to free the 12 boys and their football coach. You remember that they became stranded over a fortnight ago when the tunnels became waterlogged by rain. Well, British divers were called on, and they helped to find the group sheltering on a rocky ledge around 2.5 miles from the mouth of the cave on Monday. Well, that vast cave network stretches some 10 kilometres into the mountain, and the flooded tunnel is 1 mile underwater. Now, the first boy was brought out of the cave at around midday our time, and all of the 4 rescued boys are now being treated in hospital. Well, rescue efforts have been paused overnight to allow divers to prepare for the next mission. Meanwhile, the rain that the rescue team had been dreading appears to have arrived. It is, of course, monsoon season. OK, let's speak now to Andy Eavis. He's the former head of the British Caving Association, and he joins us via webcam from Hull. Andy, you've been following this story. You've been talking to us here on BBC News. This latest development, we've had 4 boys out. What's your response to that?
Euphoria. I think it's absolutely wonderful that they've got 4 out safely, and it suggests, with a great deal of luck and not too much rain, that they can get the other 9 out. So fingers crossed. But the great moment last week was actually getting through and finding the boys and finding all 13 of them alive. That was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And the second wonderful moment was getting the first of them out intact and looking pretty good. I mean, in between, unfortunately, there was this dreadful disaster of the Thai diver dying, and it just underlines the danger that there is with this type of operation. And the cave divers do realise this situation, and they will be being very, very careful and very cool and calm and collected. And you were asking earlier what they'll be doing in this period. They'll be resting. I hope that they will get as much rest as they possibly can to enable them to go back in and perform their operation both safely for themselves and safely for the people they're rescuing.
Is a 10-hour period enough to relieve that stress that the human body is put under when it comes to diving? I know it's not deep water diving. Nevertheless, there are incredible stresses being put on those divers.
I suppose one could say, no, it's not really enough. But I think there's now an element of urgency in this. I don't know quite what difference the rain will make, but I suspect quite a significant difference in making it longer underwater. So the underwater passages will become longer, the flooded sections will be longer, the airspace will be shorter. So if it's pouring with rain, the sooner they get back in and get the rest out, the better. I don't think there is a danger, sort of an immediate danger anyway, of them actually flooding out where they are and it going to the roof and you know, really giving them a life-threatening problem. But it will certainly, the rain will make the rescuing more difficult. So I know they will think the sooner the better, but they need to rest. So it's balancing the two.
Just how fit are these chaps? And I'm assuming here that they are all men.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
How fit are these divers?
The divers are very fit. I mean, they are physically pretty fit. Rick has just canoed round Tasmania, so you've got to be pretty fit to do that. They are fit guys, but they are very, very experienced cave divers, and those two words are important. They're not just divers and they're not just cavers. They're cave divers, and it's a different mindset when you're underwater, underground. It's more of a mind exercise than a physical exercise, and you have to have exactly the right frame of mind to keep cool and calm and collected, and that's what everybody has to do. These boys are showing a wonderful fortitude, and for them to keep calm during the 9 days they were in complete darkness is wonderful, and that really points to the fact that they are probably going to be pretty cool and calm coming out underwater. And certainly the 4 coming out now will have obviously experienced that, and they've got out safely, and you know, great. They are coming home, brilliant.
You're talking there about you know, mind exercise. Are there certain tricks that they would have taught the children from their own experience and knowledge? Well,
Jeff earlier was saying that they will be swimming them around in the pool, and they will be trying to get them confident underwater. The fact they can't swim doesn't matter very much. The fact that there's no visibility, or there's probably almost no visibility in the water, is a shame, but not a serious problem. The big problem is they have to be comfortable underwater. These boys have to be comfortable underwater, never having been with scuba gear on before. To put them underwater like that is obviously a stressful situation, and you know, I think the fact that they are young guys is helpful. One, they're small, so they can get through the small places easier than a larger person. They can be manhandled by the divers with them easier than a larger person, and they haven't got the life experience, so they probably don't fully realise the extreme danger they're in. And you know, those things are factors in the right direction. The fact that they got in there to start with shows that these are pretty adventurous kids, and they got in this problem because they were being over-adventurous, and they've got to be over-adventurous to get themselves out.
They've been down there for a fortnight, these boys. They're in a pretty weak state. Obviously, they have been fed since they've been found. But going into the water, what's the primary concern for somebody who's trying to get these boys out safely?
The absolute primary concern will be to try and keep them calm and give them every assurance they possibly can that they will be in safe hands underwater. It's the biggest danger they have by a long, long way is panic. If they can just keep cool and calm, they will get out safely. The gear will be good. I mean, the gear will all have been vetted by the cave divers, and it will be the best available. It will be very reliable. They will have the best systems they can possibly have. The cave divers are the best that there are in the world. So everything is good as long as the boys don't panic. The great danger is them over worrying. And as I say, there's a lot of signs to suggest that they're in a really good frame of mind to be able to handle this. And you know, it's a great tribute to this football team that they're able to do that. That, you know, fit, young, and not worrying is great, is wonderful. I'm very optimistic that in the next few days we will get them all out. It depends on the weather. The weather is absolutely critical in this, and it won't be rushed. I mean, whether they can bring more than 4 out a day, I don't know. And, you know, clearly that's going to take another 3 days if they can only bring 4 out. But they mustn't sort of run any of the dangers that could be tempting, like putting more rescue divers in who haven't adequate experience, or trying to bring the boys out without adequate preparation or anything like that. It's unlikely that will happen, but it depends on the weather. It depends on how quickly they think this water is going to increase, how much longer it could potentially make the dives out, and so on. And only people out there can make those decisions. It's not possible back here in England really to know enough about it. I know this part of the world. I've caved a lot in neighbouring caves to this, and I would not go anywhere near these caves in the wet season, which is what it is at the moment. Dry season, the caves are empty and often huge and beautiful. Wet season, they are huge flowing rivers which are very difficult to navigate, and the water levels come up very quickly, as you know, as these kids discovered 2 weeks ago, and the water came up very quickly, cut them off, and the rest is history. That we're now having to rescue them. And
Andy, I just want to jump in very quickly. Everybody's saying, you know, the greatest danger is that the boys will panic. As the public who are listening to this, you know, you get this sense of claustrophobia just listening to these descriptions. How are people who go through caving and cave diving, how are you taught to calm somebody down who does have a panic attack? Because we haven't quite had an explanation with that. How do you manage somebody who suddenly is hit by a bout of panic? How do you overcome that and keep everybody safe on the team?
Well, I'm a very, very experienced caver. I've been caving over 50 years. I was president of the World Caving Association for 8 years, and I've caved all over the world. And I see it all from rather a different perspective from, you know, what many other people would see it. I believe probably 50 years ago I possibly did have a slight inkling towards claustrophobia, but you pretty soon, as an experienced caver, realise it's pointless. I get claustrophobia in Christmas shopping. I hate being surrounded by thousands of people. That's claustrophobia. Caves are my territory. You know, that's where I am at home, and that's where these cave divers are at home. Of course, the children aren't in that same situation, and that's really what I say. They have to be persuaded and, you know, and coaxed into understanding and getting comfortable in their environment and underwater in their environment. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that is what will happen. I mean, if people do have serious problems underground, they usually don't go underground. And I've taken lots of people underground, quite a few novices, although I wouldn't say, you know, I've taken a huge number of novices underground. And if anybody shows any sign of really worrying about it, you bring them out as quickly as you possibly can, and they probably never go in a cave again. And you know, it's a lesson learned, and there's obviously going to be quite a few lessons learned from this exercise, and hopefully, you know, that will be good for reducing the chance of this sort of rescue happening again in the future.
Okay, Andy Eavis, former head of the British Caving Association, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're watching BBC News. Well, let's take you back to Thailand and the Reuters correspondent, Panu Wongcha-am. He spoke to us earlier and he described the scene as reports started to emerge that 2 of the boys might have been rescued.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the entire operation relies on many factors, and the children have to go through a very difficult 1 kilometer stretch of diving. So it is an extraordinary undertaking, even for experienced diver. And as we speak, there's still a little bit of rain coming down here near the Tham Luang complex, which means that over the next few days, the water level inside the cave could potentially rise as well.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how the weather impacts that rescue operation. And just to stress that the BBC does not have independent confirmation reconfirming that those 2 boys have been rescued safely. But this story has gripped the world. I can only imagine what a charged and emotionally charged atmosphere it must be there on the ground.
Certainly, I mean, for us covering this story, there's been very little bits of information coming out of the operation, understandably because of the complexity of the operation, because of the line of communication that is very difficult through the caves, because it involves many different departments and government officials. I mean, sure, we're talking about a group of 13 international divers as well as the Thai Navy SEAL, but that operation involves more than these people. There are countless of departments involved in the entire operation that involves draining of the water, drilling, examining of the mountain, as well as other support functions inside the cave by other rescuers and agencies. So it is a very complex operation. It has been well drilled over the past few days, as the head of the Rescue Operations Center told the media this morning. And hopefully there will be a happy ending to this story as things develop.
That is what we are all wishing for. And just tell me a bit more about why the authorities changed their mind. They're now calling this the right window of opportunity. But in the early days, we were told that this could take months. Why did things change?
Things changed because heavy rain are forecast over the next few days. I mean, Thailand is in the middle of the monsoon season right now, so they're afraid that they have to battle more water. And on that front, the draining operation has also achieved some success inside the cave, and we were told this morning that water levels have been the lowest since the boys have gone missing inside the cave. So these two factors combined, as well as the health condition of the boys, the authority here decided that this was the D-Day.
So the water levels you're saying are at the lowest, but more rain is expected. How might this impact the rescue operation? Because there are still many more boys to be found safely.
Well, in the last two weeks, we have seen during the initial search operation that heavy rain would be followed by a huge amount of water that come from underground inside the cave. So the authority, which monitoring this weather pattern, said that once it rains, we need to really bring them out now before this water rises again, because the last time that happened, they have to retreat back from the cave, and it took them many days before they can reach back to the position they were when it was drier. So this is the key, really. The whole operation is a battle against the weather and the water.
And what I'm fascinated by is that this is a testing journey even for experienced divers. I believe an 11-hour full round stretch. How will these young boys cope?
Well, it's difficult to say because we have very little details about the actual operation and how it's proceeding in terms of what goes on in the cave. But we know that there are doctors with the boys. We've been told that these doctors, at least one Thai doctor, do initial assessment to choose who is more fit to go through first. This is based on the press statement released by the Thai authority here. This is the process they do. They said that they will select the fittest first, and they will guide them one by one out of the cave And apart from the elite team of divers, they also have other rescuers and divers in other section of the cave, the less arduous section of the cave, guiding them through pulley system in some parts, guiding these boys out to safety.
That was the Reuters correspondent, Panu Wongcha speaking to us earlier. Now, coordinating the rescue mission are two British cave diving experts, John Volanthen and Richard Stanson. Well, Martin Farr knows the pair very well and is an expert himself. He said the operation seemed to be going very well. He spoke to me earlier.
This is absolutely fantastic news. The boys are starting to come out of the cave. That will be a massive morale booster, and it obviously is an indicator that things are going very well at this point in time. But clearly it's a big ask for everyone involved, and we all understand how critical this weather window, it's shrinking as we speak, but the right people are doing the right things, and I'm optimistic that things will carry on like this.
OK, you mentioned the weather there. Clearly you have some reservations, you have the experience. What are your primary concerns?
Well, like everyone else watching the programme, we all know if you have a torrential downpour, we've seen images of the current in the cave today. Now, that would be a major problem for everyone if that rainfall intensifies in the very near future.
For all of us, in fact for the world, this has been a crash course in cave diving. We've heard about the quite treacherous conditions the boys are having to face.
Yeah.
For a child to go into the caves, but then for a child to cave dive, what would be your reservations?
It's extremely challenging. There is no doubt about that at all. But the images we're seeing of the youngsters clearly show them in good morale, in great morale. And yes, I'm quite sure that they are taking to this activity remarkably well, judging by the speed of the evacuation of the first people.
Now, John and Richard are out there. They're adding their expertise to the operation. Have you heard any news from themselves?
No. Well, I won't say unfortunately. It would obviously be great to speak with them, but we all appreciate every friend and family member of the British divers out there will understand they are totally concentrating on the job that has to be done, and they can't afford any distraction from getting that job done. They are the best rescue team that possibly could be pulled up in this instant, but I'm sure they're going to carry on doing a fantastic job.
Martin, we've heard about the training and the practicing and the rehearsals that would have taken place. How important is a diving plan in something like this?
I'm sure everybody out there has been formulating this plan for many days, and clearly the plan is working.
How many plans would there be?
I'm sure there have been quite a number of plans, and the weather window, this narrow time slot that we have confronting the team, well, this has sort of precipitated the action, as we all know. But this emergency, this narrow time slot, will have been planned for, and everything is going well.
Martin, when you're down there, obviously communication tactics are important amongst adults. So what sort of things would be used, and then what would be used to communicate with the children?
Well, fortunately, there have been a number of Thai Navy SEALs going to the chamber, and I'm quite sure that all along the route there will be Thai rescue personnel to help with the communication difficulties, should there be communication difficulties.
Now, we heard about the possibility of a sedation of the boys to calm them down, to avoid the panic, which is the greatest danger in a rescue such as this. Is sedation really a possibility? I mean, what are the risks involved in something like that?
I'm not medically qualified to answer that, but I know certainly that some of the personnel on site are doctors, highly experienced doctors, highly experienced cave divers, and so if that option is required, I'm sure that the equipment, the knowledge, the expertise is there to get this job done.
Martin, if you are cave diving with an expert, a colleague, that's fair enough. If you're diving with somebody who's inexperienced, what sort of advice do you give to them before you enter a system like that to make sure that the dive continues safely?
Once they're under the water, they are either going to be, well, it's going to be difficult under the water because you have seen the situation yourself. The visibility is going to be very low, and we all hope that no panic will arise. So, judging by what we see of the youngsters, I am very optimistic. They're being particularly brave, and yeah, they are a credit to Thailand. They are absolutely great young people, and I'm confident that they can hold it together.
That was cave diving expert Martin Farr. Earlier, I spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Steve Whitlock, who was part of the 2004 rescue mission in one of the world's biggest cave systems in Mexico City.
It's good news that we're starting to see people come out of the cave, but it's not over until it's over. You go through a period of seeing success, but the rescue isn't over until all of the people are out of the cave, including the rescuers. So there's a way to go yet, but it is really good news that we're starting to see people come through those difficult passages and get out of that cave. But I would caution people just to be, a little bit careful, because we've still got an awful lot of people that have got to come out of that cave, and obviously we've still yet to see the remaining members of the team to come through.
Okay, so you've been part of a rescue team, as I said earlier, took place in Mexico City. How closely does that event resemble what we're seeing now in Thailand?
Well, in some ways it's very similar. So we rescued a group of 6 cavers from a similar situation who was sunk in a cave. The big difference was that it was part of a contingency plan. Although it was a rescue, we were aware that that cave flooded. We'd had a data logger in that particular cave for 3 years before we actually went in there, and we knew it flooded to the roof, so we had a camp already set up in case of emergency. We had lines laid to allow those people to come out through that cave, and we also had Rick and another a diver on standby in the UK should that happen. So the difference was we were slightly more prepared because we knew that particular cave flooded.
I mean, there are so many teams from around the world involved in this. Are the right, well, I don't want to say that, but in terms of cave diving, where do you go first for expertise?
Well, the obvious answer for me was Rick Stanton. And we knew that nearly 14 years ago, and the situation hasn't really changed, although there are some really good cave divers all over the world, but it's quite a close-knit community. And is there a number where you can dial for a cave dive rescue? Probably not. So it's an interesting thought. But if you're sort of caving at the level that we certainly were in Mexico, there were enough members of my team that understood who to ring, and obviously we'd arranged that beforehand.
Okay, we're hearing a lot about a plan, a diving plan. What's involved in one of those? Can you just take us through?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you need to know the cave in detail, and Rick would have done that when he first moved in to find those, to find the members of the team. But you would need to find how long you were submerged, how complex that cave system is, and we've seen a lot on the news about how tight it was. and how difficult it was, and that would have been a big part of the plan. Can you move people in there? And of course, the other thing you've got to consider is the safety of the rescuer, because if you're moving somebody through an environment like that who's not used to it, then it's as dangerous for the rescuer as it is for the person being rescued, particularly if that person starts to panic, loses the line, or even worse, gets everybody disorientated. So all of that needs to be considered. And you need to train for it. I mean, we trained on the far side of the sun. I hadn't trained members of the team that I had before we went to Mexico, those people that were trapped. But before we dived them through, we trained them in the cave, in water, to make sure that we understood how they reacted before we even considered bringing them out using divers.
That was Lieutenant Colonel Steve Whitlock there speaking to me earlier. So just to remind you of the breaking news, 4 of the 12 boys that were trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand have been brought out. Initially they were transferred to a field hospital for medical assessment. We now know that they've been taken to a district hospital where they are being treated. The latest news from the head of the Joint Command Centre is that there are 90 divers involved in this operation. 50 of them are foreign and 40 are Thai. The operation is now on hold. There's a 10-hour gap to prepare for the next stage, which will resume at 8 a.m. local time. That's 8 a.m. in Thailand, before the next stage of this operation continues. You're watching BBC News. Do stay with us.
Summer's here and the time is right for dancing in the street.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there. Let's take a quick look at some interesting weather happening around the world. First off to Australia, where there's a lot of dry, settled weather. The recent showers that we've seen in the southeast are easing away. Still some unsettled, showery weather for New Zealand on Monday, but it will be drying up later in the week. There's a typhoon, Maria, which is sitting in the western Pacific. That could well head towards Taiwan and eastern parts of China into the middle of this week. Heavy monsoon rain for western and central parts of India, including Maharashtra and Goa too. Heavy downpours around the Gulf of Guinea, and it's rather cool and showery for northern parts of South Africa and Zimbabwe too. For Europe, settled, warm and sunny for many northwestern parts. Meanwhile, low pressure holding on towards the southeast. And we've got some heavy showers for Colombia and Venezuela. Temperatures in Rio de Janeiro dipping down over the next few days with the arrival of some showers. There'll also be plenty of showers around some of these Gulf states, but it is hot and dry for Montreal and for New York too. Bye for now.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A dairy cow that talks to farmers. What kind of sorcery is that? It's not the magic wand kind. It's the RFID collar and Internet of Things kind we created with Chidley Dairy. So every cow can let farmers know how she feels and what she needs to be healthier. All with a simple text. Ta-da! Magic can't make digital transformation happen, but we can. That's the power of VMware, part of Dell Technologies.
For the next 4 weeks, BBC Sport will be on the ground reporting on all the action from every stage of the FIFA World Cup tournament. Go online for up-to-the-minute results and in-depth analysis, or download the BBC Sport app and select the teams you want to track. Follow the 2018 FIFA World Cup kick by kick with BBC Sport.
I was not frightened of Harvey Weinstein, and I think that's why he blackballed me.
My task as president of the ANC is to pull everyone together, to unite everyone, so that we all move in the same direction.
The nuclear issue is not just a South Korean issue, it's a global issue.
I think we're living in a time where we're seeing very different stresses and conflicts than we had in my father's time.
When you're only the second person in the world to have a baby in office, of course it's going to be of interest. I don't mind that at all. What I hope is that someday in the future it won't be interesting anymore.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
This is BBC News. I'm Loquesta Burak. The headlines at 5. Officials in Thailand say 4 boys have been rescued from a flooded cave system and have been taken to a local hospital. The boys and their football coach had been trapped in the complex cave system for more than a fortnight and were found by rescue divers earlier this week. A team of 90 divers have helped the boys through a difficult part of the route. The rescue effort has been suspended until tomorrow morning. Hello. Rescue teams in Thailand say 4 out of the 12 boys trapped in a cave complex in the north of the country have been rescued. The boys and their coach have spent 2 weeks underground. A major rescue operation involving a team of international divers and military personnel will resume early on Monday morning local time. The complicated operation, escorting each child through submerged and narrow caves, didn't take as long as expected, but there will now be a gap of about 10 hours as the rescue teams rest and preparations are made for the next phase. So let's take a look back at the day's events now with this report from Simon Jones.
Ambulances arrive at hospital, one of the first signs that hours into this unprecedented operation, the first boys have been rescued after being trapped for more than 2 weeks. These are some of the rescuers emerging into the darkness, the first part of their mission accomplished. This had been named D-Day by the authorities, who declared the boys and their coach were ready to move. And with fears of rising waters, officials decided they could wait no longer.
I would like to inform the public at home and those who have been giving us support all along. After 16 days, today's the day we've been waiting for. We are seeing the boys in the flesh now.
The boys were said to be determined and focused, physically and mentally fit. Expert divers have been guiding them out through darkness and submerged passageways towards the mouth of the cave. It's involved a mixture of walking, wading, climbing and diving. Their families agreed they should be moved as soon as possible. The emergency vehicles near the cave entrance showed progress had been made. The first group out quicker than expected. The operation is now over for the day, but it will resume come daylight. The relief that the first boys have been rescued, tempered with the knowledge of the challenges still ahead. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Nick Beak is at the Chiang Rai Hospital, where we believe, Nick, the boys were brought to. Just take us through the sequence of events.
Yeah, Loquesta, it's late in the evening here in this part of northern Thailand, and it's at this hospital tonight that the doctors and nurses have the responsibility of looking after these 4 boys, the first to be brought out as part of this extraordinary rescue operation. They were ready and they were primed, and earlier this evening the first patient arrived. We saw an ambulance race to this place. They went straight to the main entrance. A short time later there was a second ambulance arrive. After that we heard the helicopter overhead and then a 4th helicopter, and those 2 boys brought into another entrance. We believe they've undergone checks this evening. They had a plan in place for basic checks, so blood tests, urine tests, looking to see if they picked up any sort of infection in the water or underground over the past weeks. Because remember, it's been more than a fortnight now that they were trapped in this cave, and how they would be plucked to safety looked extremely difficult indeed. But we know tonight 4 boys are here and they're being looked after.
Do we know if their family have been able to visit?
That is something we don't know. Certainly the family have been kept up to date with the latest information. The family kept almost a 24/7 vigil at the site, at the cave complex where the boys were trapped, probably about an hour by car from here. We're not sure where the family members are tonight. You'd imagine, wouldn't you, that they are inside with the boys if they're able to see them. But of course, just 4 boys of the 12 who went into the cave have been brought out so far. So potentially for 4 families this evening, the most incredible sense of relief and joy. But for 8 other families, the wait continues, and of course their football coach as well, he still remains in there.
Nick, I'm just looking at life, you know, continuing behind you with the traffic, and like you say, it is late. What's the local reaction been around the hospital and within Chiang Rai? What have they been saying about this story?
Well, people have been delighted.